James Marion Sims is often hailed as the father of modern gynecology. His contributions to the field are frequently celebrated in medical history. He pioneered groundbreaking surgical techniques and instruments, most notably the speculum, which remains a fundamental tool in gynecological exams today. This tool revolutionized women's healthcare, allowing for more thorough and accurate examinations, and ultimately improving the diagnosis and treatment of various conditions. However, this progress came at a deeply disturbing cost, one that casts a long shadow over Sims's legacy. Sims honed his skills and knowledge through unethical experiments on enslaved black women, who were subjected to his procedures without their consent. These women were subjected to repeated surgeries without anesthesia, enduring unimaginable pain and suffering. Sims believed, as did many of his contemporaries, that black people were less sensitive to pain than white people. This belief was not based on scientific evidence but on deeply ingrained racial prejudices. This racist and deeply flawed assumption allowed him to justify his cruel practices, perpetuating a cycle of abuse and exploitation. As we celebrate the advancements Sims brought to medicine, we must also confront the horrific exploitation at their foundation. The suffering of these women cannot be overlooked or forgotten. Only then can we truly understand the complex and troubling legacy of this pivotal figure. It is a legacy that forces us to question the ethical boundaries of medical research and practice. Sims's story is a stark reminder that medical progress cannot be divorced from ethical considerations. The methods used to achieve breakthroughs are just as important as the breakthroughs themselves. His legacy serves as a cautionary tale, urging us to critically examine the circumstances surrounding medical breakthroughs, particularly when those breakthroughs are built on the suffering of marginalized groups. We must ensure that the pursuit of knowledge does not come at the expense of human dignity and rights. The history of medicine, like all history, is often told from the perspective of the powerful. This perspective can obscure the experiences and contributions of those who were exploited and marginalized. It is time to shift the narrative, to center the voices of the marginalized, and to recognize the full and often uncomfortable truth behind scientific progress. By doing so, we honor the memory of those who suffered and ensure that their stories are not erased. Only then can we work towards a more just and equitable future for all, where medical advancements are achieved through ethical means and benefit everyone, regardless of their background or status. James Marion Sims began his medical career in Alabama in the 1830s. This was a time when the medical field was still in its infancy, and many practices were rudimentary by today's standards. This was the heart of the American South, a region where the institution of slavery was deeply entrenched. The economy of the South was heavily dependent on the labor of enslaved people, who worked in the fields, homes, and various other capacities. Sims' medical practice quickly became intertwined with this brutal system. He saw an opportunity to advance his career by addressing the medical needs of the enslaved population, which were often neglected or poorly understood. He established his practice in Montgomery, a major center for the slave trade. The city was bustling with activity, and the demand for medical services was high, especially among the wealthy elite who owned large numbers of enslaved people. His clientele consisted largely of wealthy plantation owners. These individuals had significant resources and were willing to invest in medical care to maintain the health and productivity of their enslaved workforce. These owners relied on Sims to keep their enslaved workforce healthy and productive. They understood that a healthy workforce was essential for the continued prosperity of their plantations. This included ensuring the reproductive health of enslaved women. Reproductive health was a critical issue because the ability of enslaved women to bear children directly impacted the future labor force. The economic prosperity of the South relied heavily on the forced labor of enslaved people. Every aspect of Southern life, from agriculture to industry, was built on the backs of these individuals. Enslaved women were viewed as valuable assets, not only for their labor in the fields but also for their capacity to bear children. Their ability to reproduce was seen as a way to ensure a continuous supply of labor. Children born into slavery represented a continuation of the workforce, a perpetuation of the system. These children were often put to work at a young age, contributing to the economic engine of the South. Therefore, the reproductive health of enslaved women was of paramount importance to slave owners. They sought to maximize the number of healthy births to sustain their labor force. Sims, recognizing this dynamic, focused his attention on treating conditions that affected enslaved women's reproductive capabilities, particularly vesicovaginal fistula. This condition was debilitating and had a significant impact on the lives of those affected. This condition, often a result of traumatic childbirth, caused incontinence and often rendered women infertile. The lack of effective medical treatments at the time meant that many women suffered in silence. By offering a solution to this problem, Sims positioned himself as a valuable asset to slave owners, further entrenching himself within the system of slavery. His work, while advancing medical knowledge, was deeply rooted in the exploitation and suffering of enslaved women. Vesicovaginal fistula, a condition that creates an abnormal opening between the bladder and the vagina, was a common and devastating ailment among enslaved women in the 19th century. This condition often arose from prolonged and obstructed labor, a consequence of inadequate healthcare and nutrition, which were rampant issues among the enslaved population. James Marion Sims, a physician of the era, recognized the immense suffering this condition caused. He saw the potential for developing a surgical solution that could alleviate this widespread problem. Driven by ambition and the desire to make a name for himself in the medical community, Sims embarked on a quest to find a cure for vesicovaginal fistula. However, his ambition came at a steep ethical cost, as he chose to experiment on enslaved women without their consent. Sims began his experiments by using these women as subjects in his quest to perfect a surgical technique to repair the fistula. These women endured numerous surgeries, often under excruciating conditions. Central to Sims's experiments was his invention of the speculum, an instrument that allowed for better visualization of the vagina and cervix, which was crucial for his surgical procedures. This tool, revolutionary in its own right, became a symbol of Sims's dual legacy in the field of medicine. On one hand, the speculum represented a major advancement in women's healthcare, paving the way for modern gynecological examinations and procedures that have saved countless lives. On the other hand, the speculum became a tool of exploitation in the hands of Sims, who used it to perform repeated surgeries on enslaved women. These surgeries were often conducted without anesthesia, subjecting the women to immense pain and suffering, and were performed without their consent, raising serious ethical concerns. Thus, the speculum, while a symbol of medical progress, also became irrevocably linked to the pain and suffering inflicted upon these women, highlighting the dark side of medical advancements. This duality continues to haunt the legacy of James Marion Sims. His work serves as a stark reminder of the ethical complexities embedded within medical history and the importance of consent and humane treatment in medical practices. Central to the ethical debate surrounding James Marion Sims is the question of consent. Did the enslaved women upon whom he experimented willingly participate in his surgeries? The answer, unequivocally, is no. To even entertain the notion of consent within the context of slavery is to fundamentally misunderstand the power dynamics at play. Enslaved people were not citizens, they were property. They had no legal rights, no bodily autonomy, and certainly no power to refuse a white doctor's demands. While Sims claimed that the women clamored for his help, desperate for relief from their condition, this assertion rings hollow in the face of the overwhelming power differential. These women were trapped within a system that stripped them of their agency. They were entirely at the mercy of their enslavers and the white doctors who served them. To suggest that they freely consented to these painful and experimental procedures is to ignore the brutal realities of slavery. The very foundation of Sims's work rests upon this fundamental denial of their humanity, rendering any claims of consent utterly meaningless. Among the many enslaved women subjected to Sims's experimentation, one name stands out: Anarcha Wesley. Anarcha endured a horrific ordeal, undergoing at least 30 painful surgeries at the hands of Marion Sims. Her story exemplifies the cruelty and inhumanity at the core of Sims' work. Anarcha, like many enslaved women, suffered from vesicovaginal fistula. Her condition, likely a result of a traumatic childbirth, caused her immense pain and suffering. Sims saw her not as a patient deserving of care and compassion, but as an opportunity to advance his surgical technique. For 4 years, Anarcha was subjected to repeated experimental surgeries, all without anesthesia. Sims, clinging to the racist belief that black people did not experience pain as acutely as white people, refused her any form of pain relief. He documented his experiments in detail, meticulously recording his surgical innovations while remaining largely silent on Anarcha's suffering. Anarcha's story, though horrific, is not unique. Countless other enslaved women endured similar ordeals, their names lost to history, their pain minimized and ignored. It is crucial that we remember Anarcha, that we say her name, and that we honor her memory by confronting the horrific truth of her exploitation.